to discuss Tommy Robinson. Mr. Robinson, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for coming over.
It's good to be seen.
Now, what brings you to Russia?
I'm giving a presentation tomorrow to explain the history and the dangers of what's called grooming, which is more of a rape jihad.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about the topic of your talk, correct me if I'm wrong, it's titled The Rape of Britain. I know that you are prone to generalizations, but isn't that too broad and too threatening of a statement?
No, it's not. And prone to generalizations, I say first, in my raping discussion, I talk about Islam, not Muslims in general. Not every.
How can you talk about Islam and not talk about Muslims in general?
Because Islam's an idea. It's a book. It's an idea. To criticise that idea.
But it's practiced by Muslims.
But if I criticise Christianity, I'm not insulting or picking fault at every Christian. I'm picking fault at the idea. So when we see the rape levels that we've seen in our country, and from a population, Muslim males make up 2.2% of the British population. They are responsible for 84% of the convictions of this type of rape. And what we have to ask the question is why, which we're not allowed to ask.
Well, I think you pointed out very specifically that it's this type of rape, and I suggest that we talk in more detail about various kinds of rape. But before we do that, when I heard the title of your talk, The Rape of Britain, the immediate association that I got was with the book The Rape of Nanking. It's a very famous book describing 6 weeks in 1937, during which the Japanese forces killed at least 200,000 Chinese civilians and raped at least 20,000 Chinese women. Even with those cases that you're trying to highlight, the rape statistics in Britain is nowhere near that. In fact, if you look at the statistics, Britain is pretty much on par with other developed countries.
19,000 children in 2018 were groomed by these gangs in 1 year. So when you talk about the rape of Britain, if I give you the statistics, we have a town called Telford. It has a 1.8% Muslim population. 1,000 children were raped by those gangs. 5 have been murdered in that town alone. When you take the 1.8% and you take away under 16s and you take away over 65s, there's only 956 Muslim men in that town. The police have identified 200 in Operation Chalice. That means that 21% of the Muslim men in that town have been involved in the rape and torture of our daughters.
Mr. Robinson,
21%.
you refer to them as Muslims, but I'm not a Muslim myself, but I'm married to a Muslim, and I know for a fact that Islam imposes very strict limits on extramarital sex, not to mention rape. I mean, those people that are convicted of raping anyone, they would not be considered Muslims by Islam. Why do you have to tie it to?
If you come and see, if my presentation I give tomorrow proves all of this, categorically proves it. It says 4 times in the Quran that outside of your 4 wives, you can take whatever the right arm possesses. Sexual slaves. And I have on my video, I will have imams and experts confirming what that means, sexual slaves. I also look at witness testimonies from the victims. And I also listen to what the perpetrators said in court. So the men, when they were sentenced in Rotherham, all of them chanted Allah Akbar. The comments they make were about, if whilst we're on the grooming scandal, one of the girls they murdered, the day before he murdered her, he sent his friend a message saying he's sending that kuffar to hell.
But
kuffar being non-Muslim.
Understanding of Islam, but I'm sure you would agree that there are hundreds of thousands, millions of Muslims who would be just as revolted at the idea of a girl or a boy or child being raped as they are. And by referring to them as Muslims, you are also tainting those individuals because they subscribe to the Muslim faith as well.
I'm not tainting them. What I'm saying is, if 84% of convictions are Muslim males from 2.2%, why do you think that is? Why
I don't know where you got the statistics from, because
that's from the Quilliam Foundation, which is a Muslim anti-extremism think tank.
But I mean, the last time I checked, British police actually does not keep track of or does not release the ethnicity or the religious affiliation of the perpetrators.
Out of the 404 so far, men who have been convicted for this type of rape.
Again, you keep referring to this type of rape, but I mean,
brothers, cousins,
in most countries, developed countries, and the UK is no exception here, the majority of rapes are perpetrated by the locals, and in the British case, it would be white males. Are you saying that a British girl being raped by her British neighbor is somehow less offensive than a British girl being raped by her ethnic Pakistani neighbor.
No, it's not. What I'm saying is that you have type 1 and type 2 in the UK. That's how it's known. Type 1 is where gangs of men who know each other, they're usually related in most of these cases, in every town and city, brothers, cousins, work colleagues. That has never happened in the UK. Out of those convictions, 0.5% have a British name. 0.5%. Now, when you were talking about type 2 paedophilia, that is lone paedophiles sharing their sexual fantasies with other lone paedophiles via the internet or grooming in that process. Literally exclusively, that is white. But that's because we live in an 87% white country. That hasn't been covered up. What we have seen, for example, in Manchester, a young girl was injected with heroin in 2003. She was 15 years old. She was murdered by a 50-year-old Muslim male who had been grooming her and raping her.
Isn't it?
The police launched an investigation. Okay, they identified the perpetrators. Then in 2005, Colin Cramphorn shut down the investigation. Okay, he closed it. He was rewarded by the British state, a CBE, the biggest award you can get for hiding this fact. Then we had the investigation in Telford, where local politicians blocked an investigation. We've seen a cover up.
I can easily believe that
politicians
or local authorities could be covering that out of political correctness, but this
in every town and city. If it was one town or two, but we have seen grooming gangs operating in 44 cities, and we've seen every one of them.
But look,
that is an
organized crime
establishment.
exists in all countries, and in many countries, Russia, for example, prostitution rings or human trafficking rings are run by ethnically homogenous groups. Britain is no exception here. I know for a fact that there are many ethnic Russians involved in human trafficking in Western Europe, perhaps even in the UK, but they're doing that not because they're Russians. They're doing that because they're criminals. Why are you portraying it as a religious issue rather than a criminal one?
In my presentation tomorrow, you'll hear from the victims. So the victims say it's racial and religious. The perpetrators say it's racial and religious. The Quran and the Scripture supports and justifies these actions against non-Muslims.
That's just simply not true.
It is true, and unfortunately, when we're not talking about sexual gratification here. We're talking about one young girl, 12 years old, had her tongue nailed to a table. Another young girl, they heated up an iron rod with the letter M, and they scalded it on her bum at 11 years old because she was the property of Muhammad. These girls are being tortured.
I can take any book. I can take Bible and use it as a pretext for the most horrible crimes. But are you actually believing that those are the people of faith?
I'm saying they're following the teachings of Muhammad. Muhammad had sexual slaves. Muhammad legitimized and had.
Come on, I can tell you that lot from it's explained in the Bible. He slept with his daughters. I mean, but we are not using that in a literal sense. I mean,
what I look at tomorrow is what the victims were told. So I give the statement: we can have sex with you once you start your period. Okay. Then I question. Let's have a look whether that is Islamic. For example, in Pakistan, they tried to ban underage marriage, and it was found by the ideology of Islam that it was un-Islamic. Why would marrying a child and having sex with her, a child, be un-Islamic? We have had 30 children married in the borough of London, in one borough of London.
Islam is a very large religion, and there are many streams within Islam, and some interpretations of Islam are indeed horrendous, as are some interpretations of the Bible. My problem with that is that, again, you would agree that there are many good people among Muslims, those people could be your allies. They could be the ones who would be looking after those potential predators, but you are alienating them by suggesting that their faith is directly responsible for the crimes of those individuals.
Boko Haram gave justification. Boko Haram, a terrorist organisation in Nigeria.
Muhammad was a rapist and a killer. This is a fact.
Enslaving them, saying it's quoted by Allah. Muhammad commands it. ISIS done exactly the same. ISIS are taking slaves, Boko Haram are taking slaves, and across every town and city in my country, they're taking slaves. My worry is, if we're worrying about me offending some people with my speech, a generation of my generation of our daughters have been kidnapped and raped.
You are a self-described British patriot, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure you know that the British legacy in some countries is pretty abhorrent. I mean, take the colonial crimes in Africa, in India. For example, just as recently as the 1950s, the British forces used rape and castration to put down uprisings in Kenya. They paid compensation to the victims a few years back. Would it justify me to throw around labels like British killers or Anglican rapist at anyone who has any relation to the British identity?
I don't live in the past, and I'm not throwing those accusations at every single Muslim. That's for me, it's an irrelevant point.
You're evading my question. Would that justify me calling anyone who has any relation to the British state, because it was the British Army, the British forces who were perpetrating those crimes, not just individuals, but actually the state institution that authorized this kind of treatment of people? Would that justify me throwing that kind of labels at anyone who is connected to the British state?
No, it wouldn't, but I'm not throwing those accusations at anyone that's connected to Islam.
But you're referring to them as Muslim rapists.
No, they were Muslim rapists.
But how is it different from the British rapists then?
Because these men are Muslims and they're rapists and they're raping young children.
And those men were also British and they were rapists and they castrated individuals.
I have no problem with you labelling those people who commit those crimes as British rapists. You don't have to tell me the injustices.
But I mean, we are talking about generalizations here. Because
I'm not generalised. I'm talking about Islam. People have to get the understanding that Islam is an idea and Muhammad is its founder, and we have a right to criticise and look at his life. Because when you look at his life and you see that he pillaged, he murdered, he raped, his wife Sophia.
There's a lot of violence in
killed thousands.
holy books.
But if you understand, say the Beslan school attack was what woke me up. That was my moment that changed.
I don't consider those people Muslims at all. I mean,
okay, you don't. But with the Beslan school attack, there was a Jewish tribe and they surrendered to Muhammad, yeah? And this is in their scripture, Sahih Bukhari, this is in Ibn Ishaq, but you have to understand the relevance of it. This is why it's so relevant, which I'll show tomorrow. Because when the Taliban took children in Pakistan, in Peshawar, when they what Muhammad done when the Jews surrendered, he pulled their pants down. Whoever had pubic hairs was beheaded.
But that's Mr. Robinson, as somebody who's reported from a lot of front lines, especially from the Muslim countries, I know that
that's what the Taliban done. The Taliban give a statement saying they done it because
many of those people were killing
Muslims.
Yes, exactly. And these are the good people that I identify with. For some reason, you are only identifying Muslims with the bad people.
I'm not. What I'm identifying is that these attacks, 1400 years later, they used the scripture to justify the attack. Now, what I'm saying is, when we see, and no one can explain it, and we're not even allowed to ask the question, what I want to do is prevent another generation of our daughters being raped. And if we have to ask serious questions to investigate why these Muslim males feel that they can do that, why brothers, took one group of them to celebrate Eid, they kidnapped a 15-year-old girl and gang raped her, and they said in court it was to celebrate Eid. Could you imagine any Christians celebrating Easter by kidnapping a Muslim child and gang raping her for 36
hours? I think Christians have a very long history of horrendous crimes, and
but not justifying it with their religion, not making comments of their religion, not making derogatory comments.
Are you killing me? Seriously, are you kidding me? I mean, we don't have time to go into that, but there are plenty of historic examples of that. I want to ask you about this specific case, the grooming case that you got yourself entangled with, and that was indeed an example of an ethnic gang specializing in sexual predation. The court, that court delivered or resulted in very, very harsh sentences. I think the defendants were collectively sentenced to over 220 years in prison.
Not all of them. One of them's in Pakistan because they let him the day they put me in jail.
But,
they let the rapist go home.
By and large, the court recognized that it was indeed a campaign of rape against teenage girls. Do you think justice was served in that case?
Justice will be served if many of them who hold dual nationality are deported when they get out of prison. I formed the English Defence League to highlight these sorts of issues. It was a total cover-up. The British establishment, the British press were involved. The journalist who was given an award for exposing this in 2011 has admitted that he knew about it 7 years prior. Everyone in our British establishment and British elite has facilitated and allowed our daughters to be raped through the fear of political correctness.
Mr. Robinson, we have to take a very short break now.
Okay.
We will be back in just a few moments. Stay tuned.